I'm going to start. Some of the information I'm going to go over today is a little bit on the depressing side. So with some good outcomes, but we're gonna go into some not the best, some of the best aspects of what we're dealing with in Kansas City. So I wanted to make sure I put in a plug. If you have not been to Kansas City, it is a wonderful place to live and to visit. And so if you haven't had a chance to visit, please do so soon after we're all able to visit a little bit easier. Just want to give a little bit of context so that you can kind of see how Kansas City compares to Memphis. We are interesting, I think, in that we have 15 school districts serving just the city of Kansas City. You can see there in the orange, the area of the city, which is the kind of original urban core, that my school district, our boundaries, and education, as in most cities, a primary factor for location decisions. Definitely an issue here when we have as much school choice as we do. Within our district boundaries, our population has declined 55% since our peak in the 50s. This is obviously an occurrence that we see in a lot of urban cities or urban centers, combination of white flight followed by black flight, disinvestment in some of those original neighborhoods, and that has had an impact on enrollment as well. So you can see our peak enrollment was in the 60s at almost 80,000. We are now under 15,000. When you factor in charter schools, that increases almost doubles, but still a significant decline in overall public school enrollment. We have obviously a lot of school choice with very good public suburban school options, pretty robust parochial school and private school. And then obviously you can see the impact of charter school enrollment as well. That was authorized in 2000 by the state of Missouri. And the school district charter relationship is different in every city, but for us, only one of the 2021 charter schools do have a formal relationship with. So in 2009, 2010, the school district went through some major closures, and at the end of that, declared 30 school sites surplus. So this gives you an idea of the scale and the inventory. The majority of these sites are in residential neighborhoods, obviously making it a little bit more challenging as you look at finding reuse options. So we wanted to make sure as we started this effort that we had some very transparent and educational opportunities with the community to talk about the realities of what's possible, what's not when you have this many surplus sites and this much square footage, especially because a lot of these sites were in some of our most disinvested neighborhoods. I've got a short little clip here. The district had gone through several, I mean, you can tell from our decline in enrollment, we've had school closures and surplus sites for years. The district had traditionally used a kind of standard real estate process, working with a broker to dispose of those surplus assets. But when we went through that right sizing effort in 2010, there was a lot of emotion in the community. And so I think this short video that an intern did a couple of years ago kind of gets to that. Share that real fast. I haven't seen that in probably a couple of years, and I know it's a minute and a half of a 10 to 15 minute presentation, so it's a lot. But I think it's important because when we talk about closed school buildings, they're not just brick and mortar. Those are major neighborhood and community assets, and closure can be traumatic, actually. And so we knew that, understanding that there had been distrust in some of the work that had been done previously at the disposition, concerns that people were getting cut side deals. It wasn't very transparent. Plus, we had this emotion in the community. We knew that we needed to do things differently. And so we really focused on rebuilding credibility and engaging the community. I think there are a couple of key strategies that worked for us in doing this. And I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to highlight a few for the sake of time. But while these were specific to our process, I do think that they are efforts that public entities or CDCs could use across a lot of different venues that are positive for community development efforts. So the first of these were site tours and exploratory meetings. I wanted to make sure that we were very transparent. People understood kind of the challenges and the opportunities within each of our sites. When I talked to some folks before we started this process and pitched this idea, they're like, "Are you crazy? This is going to just bring people out of the woodwork. They're going to be so upset, and all you're going to hear is people complain." And I said, "Well, people are already pretty pissed off at us. So if you think that anything that we do is going to stop that, you're wrong." So what we made sure that we did is we gave people a kind of a forum to share their grief and their concerns around the closure of the school. And I think by doing so, that then allowed us to move forward with them and talk productively about what viable reuses they could see that they wanted. It also gave an opportunity for developers to hear, without having a proposal on, in front of people, just to hear up front what the community would and would not support. Another key piece that we made sure that we did with our process, as we did solicit proposals, we had a technical in-house evaluation. So we made sure that we had very clear offering guidelines. It was not just we'll pay X amount for this building, but we needed enough information to make sure that the proposal that we were getting were viable. We could vet those. And then once we had proposals that we felt met that technical evaluation, we then host public meetings so that the community can hear directly from the team that is interested in acquiring the site. And then we factor that community feedback into the final decisions on whether to move forward with sales or leases. We also, because projects concepts are very preliminary at the point that we're getting under contract, we have several contract terms to ensure that what gets pitched to the school district and to the community is something that actually is carried through. And so we require additional public outreach before, say, a project goes before CPC or for the city pulling your building permits. We've negotiated property tax incentives, obviously something that impacts the school district. So making sure that we know what they're pursuing and you abide by that going forward. And then clear guidelines if there were things around the use that they pitched that the neighborhood definitely wanted to see or did not see, that got included in those agreements. And then because, we are hopeful that in the future that we will be able to grow our enrollment again, the opportunity, if those sites become available in the future and would make good viable school sites, the right to repurchase and a right of first refusal. So this is our status. We have from the beginning, or we added an additional site into our inventory, so 31 sites that we've been dealing with. We've been pretty pleased with that overall effort. And I'm going to go through a couple of projects just to give you a sense of what kinds of reuses we've had. School conversion into housing is very, the buildings lend themselves to it. Classrooms make great apartments or condos. This is a building that I highlight because it was actually slated for demolition. The community and a developer had been interested in doing it for several years, about 5, could never pull a full capital stack together. But through our process, we were able to reach out to groups who gave some suggestions where the city provided an obligation to place some affordable units elsewhere in the neighborhood. This got enough attention that those home dollars were able to be paired up with LIHTC, historic tax credits and tax abatement, to make this project work. We also have several former Seven Oaks students who are now residents of Seven Oaks School. Second one is an adult daycare. This is one of our smallest buildings. I highlight it because this is a small nonprofit, had been in the business a long time, but was very worried about taking on too much debt in both an acquisition and renovations. And so we entered into a lease with an option to purchase, where a good portion of her lease payments are being applied to the purchase price to make this a little bit easier for her to achieve. And we just had a very long conversation yesterday. She's hoping to exercise that option to purchase at the end of the year. Westport Middle School site, one of our most beautiful buildings, but this is one where the community's voice was heard. This was their desired developer, desired reuse, even though we had had some concerns about whether or not it could be pulled off initially. And so great, wonderful site within our community. And then the McCoy site I highlight because we did have to have discussions with the community from the very beginning about demolition being a possibility. And because I think of the way that we approached that conversation, the neighborhood wasn't excited about the idea of demolition, wanted us to pursue reuse proposals. We were unsuccessful, and after a little bit of vandalism, including a small fire, they asked us to move forward with demolition. So we've worked with them. A local architecture and planning firm donated some time, which was sufficient to get the Parks Department to acquire this site, and park improvements are in place. Want to put in a plug for anyone who is interested in getting more involved in activities in your public schools. I know that sometimes we're very siloed, but APA does have a public schools interest group. You do not have to be a member of APA to join. It's free. You can see the email there if you're interested. And then that's all I have. So hopefully this was of interest, and hopefully look forward to entertaining some questions later. And I will stop sharing so that we can move forward with the next group.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon. This is, I'm Tamara Dudukovich from Catalyst Communities, a Pittsburgh-based developer. And my colleague Hannah and I are going to pick up a little bit from where you left us with your story of how Kansas City is repurposing its public schools. Honestly, a couple of those school photos could have been schools in Pittsburgh. Very much similar vintage We have some wonderful structures, some landmark, some not in the city. And we, like Kansas City, went through kind of that similar wave of peak population. I think ours was the 1960 census, declining population and declining enrollment. But we have found, we'll see what the 2020 census says, but with the 2010 census, we were finally starting to see a population rebound, and particularly in the 18 to 34 age cohort. So demand for our schools may be returning, but like everything in the New World Order, undoubtedly in different shapes and forms. But in Pittsburgh, we're kind of experiencing what I would describe as our third wave of dealing with school renovations. And I want to put that in the overall context of our community's response to affordable housing pressures. So the first wave was kind of what you alluded to as well, which was, you know, some cool buildings were available, and wouldn't they make interesting condominiums and market rate apartments, and those were some of our earliest transformation efforts here. And then there was a kind of the second wave, which was the senior housing, as your project in Kansas City illustrated as well. For, you know, all of those reasons about classroom size, et cetera, lending themselves to senior housing, and frankly, the relative acceptability from a community acceptance standpoint of senior housing as a way to create income diversity in neighborhoods. And also to respond to aging in place needs. And now we're kind of in this third wave, which is the illustrated by the approach that our company is taking, and in particular in the approach that we're taking in this project called 327 North Negley Residence. So this third wave is mixed income and mixed use. It is basically building on the three-legged stool that is emblematic of the characteristics of the projects that Catalyst develops. So Catalyst draws on the leadership of our founder, Michael Polite, who had been a former government official and private developer, and Beacon Communities, which is based in Boston and is one of the nation's largest affordable housing developers, owners, and operators. They've worked on joint ventures before. In 2018, formed this new venture, Catalyst, which is pursuing projects that have sort of the characteristics of the three-legged stool. And those are affordability and inclusivity, environmental sustainability, and of course, we are a private company. And even if we were a nonprofit, projects have to stand alone and be financially viable. So I'm going to go a little bit into what we mean by this terminology, and then we'll show you through our 327 North Negley project how we're putting those into action. So affordable and inclusive is that our properties have a commitment to long-term affordability. Usually it is secured through low-income housing tax credit deed restrictions. Low-income housing tax credits really fuel the work that we do. We, where possible, pursue mixed income development, both to reduce poverty concentrations and to expand opportunity. And so our projects are contributing to revitalization goals in the community. In some cases, that is in places where there has been a lack of market investment. And in other places, it is making sure that the market investments are not succumbing to gentrification pressures, and we are still bringing along a diverse group of residents and stakeholders to maintain the vibrancy of our city neighborhoods, or Western Pennsylvania neighborhoods. We pursue projects that involve significant participation from MWBEs as partners, as vendors, and particularly in our assembly of our development teams. And we are, through our commitment to high quality operations, many of our developments include enhanced services to help residents thrive. So in family developments, it's learning centers, it's after school programs. In senior settings, it may be congregate activities. In communities that have special populations, we are working with case managers to ease the transition of those families. So then the second leg of this three-legged stool is the commitment to environmental sustainability. We really are making sure that the work that we are doing results in high performance buildings and systems, and that is both to be good to the planet and reduce energy consumption, and to serve the bottom line, which is reducing the cost to us as owners and operators and to our tenants, so that their utility expenses are not adding on to rent burdens. And one of the major ways that the work that we are doing supports sustainability goals is that much of our activity, whether it is new construction, it is happening in urban infill sites for the most part, or it is through adaptive reuse of vacant structures, which is of course one of the greenest things that you can do, for a variety of reasons that, again, this project we're going to talk about in a few minutes illustrates. And then the third leg of our stool is that, of course, that the projects have to be financially viable. And the mix of affordable housing tied to building performance and sustainability has a direct relationship on the financial performance of the property. It affects the development costs, it affects the operating costs, and those tend to be in the plus column in the upfront design phase of a project, and again in the minus column, meaning savings, in the operating phase. But it also opens doors to different forms of capital that allow us to be creative in building the capital stack for our project. And that capital stack typically includes tax credits, both the low-income housing tax credit, the 4% and the 9%, as well as historic tax credits, performing debt, and subordinated capital or gap funding from a variety of sources. The characteristic, I think, that is most distinctive about pursuing either affordable or mixed income residential development is that the primary economic return really comes from the developer fee. The cash flow and long-term asset value are much more variable in these projects, very tied to deal particulars, locational factors. We like to think that we are placing good bets on market appreciation and continued growth in the markets. And in the particular locations where we are making these kinds of redevelopment investments. But the reality is that often that subordinated capital and gap funding sucks up the cash flow to the extent it's there. And so really the motivation and the model for doing the work is a little bit different than a conventional market rate developer and how they would model and underwrite their project. So, we're going from that sort of bigger picture to the weeds a little bit. We want to tell you the story of our project that we're now calling 327 North Negley. This is a project that Kiana has been staffing for the past not quite year and a half since we were first awarded the low-income housing tax credits and received an innovation award from the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency for this project. So Kiana, would you like to continue?
Sure, thanks, Tamara. So 327 North Negley, the before picture is very telling of the condition that it's in. It's a vacant and blighted building located in the Garfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Garfield is a neighborhood that is where this building is actually on the border of the East Liberty neighborhood of Pittsburgh, which is experiencing a lot of gentrification pressure. The market has taken over in the neighborhood, and market rate rent is in high demand in this neighborhood. Low income rent is something that's hard to find right now. So this building went through many different development iterations. It has been, well, it was built, the rotunda, this round part of the building, was built as the B'nai Israel Synagogue in the 1920s. That synagogue added school buildings, 2 wings to the building. So the school wings have a banquet hall, gymnasium, classrooms. It's a traditional school type of building setting. It was most recently used by the Urban League Charter School as a school. The rotunda itself has not been used for probably about 15 years. The school buildings have not been used in about 8 to 10 years. So how do we take all of those project characteristics that Tamara talked about and kind of weave them into North Negley to make this project happen? Sorry. So for affordability and inclusivity, just some details about the project, very similar to what we heard about in Kansas City in regards to size. This project will have 45 apartments. The neighborhood has, although there are gentrification pressures, the neighborhood had some strong opinions about mixed income opportunities. So we went with a mixed income approach, and we'll talk about a little bit more why that works at this site. So 38 units will be income restricted, and to get a little bit more detailed with that, there are 10 Section 8 project-based vouchers, which will serve a very low income population. 16 of the, or I'm sorry, 6 are Section 811 income-based vouchers, which will serve mentally and physically disabled population. And then we will also have 7 market rate units. This is a family development, so there are 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. There's also a children's play area in the rear, a parking lot in the rear. And again, this is a high demand area. The street is, just the public transportation. It's kind of in the middle of the city in a perfect location for access to anything. And so how will this project impact the community? So Pittsburgh has a pretty explicit plan to evaluate development projects via something called the P4. And what that evaluates is people, place, planet, and performance. So if we did apply for funding through our local redevelopment authority, and so we had to provide metrics to that redevelopment authority about how this project will affect people, place, planet, performance, and how we are ensuring that we're doing a good job with development in those areas. So again, one way that the community had an impact, and we continue to impact the community, is we had very early and active community outreach before we applied for any funding. We had design charrettes with the community. We asked them what they wanted to see there. Did they want the building to stay in place? Did they care if it went away? So a lot of community outreach. We remain engaged with the community because we're on a border of 2 neighborhoods. We're very involved in keeping both neighborhoods abreast of kind of where we are now, when we think construction will start, and just kind of making sure everybody remains on board with what's happening there. And we also, have participation and partnerships with the community. For the rotunda itself, that will be a community serving public space that we are partnering with the neighborhood community group to kind of help us find tenants. And they will kind of be the manager of the rotunda community space. So we are partnering with the community on this. So another way that we are impacting the community is by providing opportunity. So we wanted to make sure, it's one of our goals as a company, but it's also the goals of the funding sources that we have, to make sure that this project is providing short and long-term economic opportunities for the disadvantaged populations through MWBE goal setting. So what I like to say here is that partnerships really matter. In order to meet your goals, you have to find partners and teammates that are aligned with those goals, especially when it's, whether it's historic preservation, whether it's MWDBE, Section 3, which is hiring of low-income local residents. So we have all these goals layered on, and we had to make sure we picked the right team to help us meet these goals. So our contractor for this site will be Mystic Construction, and you can see they have a long history of, winning awards for the minority women Section 3 participation that they've been able to achieve through their construction projects. In regards to environmental sustainability, we've layered on various levels of sustainability to this for the environment, and also for improvement of operating costs at the site. So we are going for passive house certification, which is very hard to do for an adaptive reuse building. We are also going for an enterprise green certification, which just ensures there's many layers of green factors included in the design. You can see the roof plan here. We will have a solar PV microgrid, which will provide not all, but the majority of the electricity to the building. As Tamara mentioned, the repurpose of the school and synagogue itself is a sustainable act. In previous iterations, the rotunda was either, the whole building could have been demolished, portions of the building could have been demolished. We are saving the whole building. We are also willing to recommend the building for historic designation in the future, once we've completed it, so that the building cannot be changed or altered beyond, our life there, or the livelihood of the residents. Our goal in sustainability is also carbon sequestration. So the materialities that we're using, we want to make sure everything is kind of in line with the sustainability practices. And we are also looking to be regenerative, just kind of reusing the land, and, just to kind of go with our regeneration of the whole building, excuse me. So we're looking to put a community farm, or it could be also a commercial or urban farm, in the lawn of the front of the building, just to be able to, continue to use the building, use the land. This neighborhood has several other urban farms, so we're hoping to partner with them just to be an extension of their farms. And the tenants could assist in the farming of the land.
Kiana, I think we probably need to give the rest of our presenter a chance here, and we can just come back if there are any questions on why mixed income makes sense at this location. But I think that
Yeah, thanks. I think we have run over our time for y'all's presentation. So if we can, I hate to cut it off right now because I know this is really interesting information to people, but I want to be sure we leave time for Steve. Maybe we can wrap back around and answer some of those or talk about that in the Q&A afterwards. Thanks, y'all. So Kiana, if you could stop sharing your screen and I'll pull Steve's slides up here. All right.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Anna. And thanks to ULI and Memphis for having me and giving me a chance to talk about this important question of affordability in cities, which means access to opportunity in cities. Is there any way, Anna, we can get rid of this waiting room indicator that's on my screen? Yeah, there we go. Thanks. So I want to talk about three planning projects that we've done for clients in housing. And I really want to press this idea of affordability. But first, I want to say a couple words about the University of Arkansas Community Design Center. We're a teaching office at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design, one of a handful of teaching offices and design programs nationwide, meaning we have a professional staff of anywhere between 3 and 5 professionals, architects and urban designers that work year round in our own facilities on the downtown square off campus in Fayetteville. So much like a teaching hospital, students will work on some of our projects, though we deliver professional services, mostly in urban planning and design for clients. Our mission is to promote creative development in Arkansas through combined research, design, and education solutions that enhance the physical environment. So we've been asked to do work outside of Arkansas. And the last 3 years, our biggest client has been the Department of Agriculture in Hawaii. So we've done work in Hawaii, Texas, Cairo, Rwanda, in other places, but most of our focus is on Arkansas. Yeah. I'll just have to tell you, Anna, next. So our center's work is not just focused on projects, but it's focused on development of place building models that triangulate policy with best practices in design, including affordable neighborhood design. You can see the other place building models that we look at, including agricultural urbanism, context sensitive street design, transit oriented development, watershed urbanism, among others. Next. One of the things we really focused on with housing is figuring out new modes of cooperation that we think are the pathways towards affordability and be able to thrive among future challenges, particularly in cities that have high levels of resilient deficits. Arkansas and Hawaii, the deficits are not so much related to sea level rise, climate change, and catastrophic events, but chronic stressors like affordability, food insecurity, and aging. So most of our work in affordable housing is focused on 3 areas, and each of the 3 projects that I'll quickly run through, this one only be in one slide, will focus on 1, land. This is a pocket neighborhood where we optimize the value of downtown land to deliver affordable housing. The second project I'll show is the bundling of services through housing for aging, where we combine healthcare services and caregiving services with the real estate platform itself. And then the third one for a downtown revitalization plan using architectural typologies like missing middle housing. So this, the slide you're looking at here is a pocket neighborhood for downtown Little Rock, where we place 10 units, 10 single family units on 0.9 acres of land. Pocket neighborhoods are a great real estate product, a very popular emerging real estate product using fee simple lots. But these lots share a green space, they share parking, it's usually gang parking for a pocket neighborhood. And a pocket neighborhood is essentially anywhere from 4 to 20 units. They can be attached or detached that are aggregated around neighborhood space or a microgreen. Usually infrastructure is shared, not just the utilities, but the parking. And this is a way to not only deliver more efficient housing and levels of density in downtown, where you want around 15, at least 15 dwelling units per acre to make transit and businesses work. But it's also a way to cut the cost, particularly the infrastructure cost of housing, which in this case is around $25,000 a lot just for the infrastructure. So we were able to price this out at $110 a square foot using SIPs, including site costs, although our client, the Little Rock Community Development Corporation, unfortunately was eliminated by the recession 10 years ago, so this project wasn't able to happen. Next. The center published a book a few years ago on houses for aging socially for a client in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This client was a nonprofit housing provider and the city. And essentially, Freeman, the town of Freeman outside of Sioux Falls is a town at which a lot of the farm population is consolidating around. As people leave small family farms, that land gets ceded to corporations. People are selecting towns. Some towns will become ghost towns. Other people will move to towns like Freeman that offer housing and healthcare. This town's average age is around 55, which is 20 years beyond the average age. This was written for many towns, which are now experiencing the tsunami of challenges that's coming from aging. This book was written for real estate products for 85% of America, who do not live in urban downtowns in our top 51 downtowns, but rather who live in sprawling metropolitan areas. We really don't have good housing stock or neighborhood stock that serves aging populations. Keep in mind that until 2030, 10,000 people a day are turning 65 in America. A fourth of the country by 2030 will be 65 and over. We'll have over 80 million baby boomers. And part of the challenges that we'll face is lack of healthcare, lack of healthcare giving services, a housing population that doesn't serve this age group. Next. So what we did in this, you get the book on Amazon, check it out, or you can view all of this work on our website. But basically, we flipped the script on housing, particularly on single family housing. What we've done is taken the kind of marginal accessories to housing, like the porch, the garage, and the patio, and made those infrastructure. So for instance, rather than a porch being an adjunct to a house, we start with the porch as a kind of block long infrastructure and plug the housing into that. And so the same thing with the garage. The garage is a kind of, you know, in American neighborhoods over the last 100 years, garages weren't just places to park cars, but mostly garages were places in which you start businesses, in which you deliver neighborhood services. So this is an attempt to, you know, like Uber and Airbnb, to go back to that American neighborhood that was informal and delivered neighborhood services and not just residential shelter. So here's the ability to develop work, to have sharing economies, to deliver health services, to participate in hobbies, whether it's at the individual level, community projects. We're looking at neighborhood templates that facilitate this kind of activity. Next. You know, and we also wrote an ecosystem of aging, 21 principles towards a new cooperation. Keep in mind that 50% of seniors in assisted living and nursing home are there due to social deficits, not medical ones. Our parents' generation, the greatest generation, had the social welfare and the pensions that allowed them to afford assisted living. But ongoing assisted living is not going to be an option for many baby boomers. The average assisted living facility per month is around $5,000 to $6,000 in America, and up to $12,000 a month. We just don't have the institutional facilities to help people in aging. So we're going to have to face through the private sector how we can work to deliver housing for this population. So we wrote 21 principles towards a new cooperation in neighborhoods. This is looking at something we call the hyperporch, where you plug the housing into the porch, where it's attached housing, detached housing, apartments, single family. It doesn't matter. You take any housing product, plug it in, create density, and use the porch, much like a ship's deck, to share services, particularly social services, healthcare services. But the porch itself becomes a kind of neighborhood infrastructure and a forum for, you know, for both commerce and sociability. Next. You know, so one of the things we say, for instance, is design third places like the porch to promote movement. You see here a cross section of the porch, which can be enclosed. People can move out to the porch, share meals, work on the porch. Much like a ship's deck, the porch can sponsor a range of human activity, but yet one can still retreat back into their home or their apartment. You know, so the porch facilitates both private and public activity. Next. You see this in this slide, where private, the semi-private, the public space is available through this kind of porch condition. So we're thinking about housing as a platform for delivering services, not as an icon that is solely about ownership and self-esteem. Here in Principle 4, begin with the porch as a street and encourage living to spill into that street. Next. And consider the view from the bedroom. 2/3 of seniors will experience some infirmity. So it's important to actually preserve at least the capacity, if there's a willingness to have a kind of exposure to the public realm and to a social life, if you know, when one is bedridden. So just thinking about these things, you know, how to inflect housing so it's responsive to aging. Next. And then looking at frontage systems, looking at porches in addition to garages as places where you know, advanced sociability happens, where hobbies happen, even an office or work, the porch can be enclosed. So this is that shell space that our neighborhoods lack, that gives residents, and you can even rent these out, lease them out, gives residents the ability to establish non-residential functions that actually accelerate sociability and commerce in neighborhoods. Next. Same thing with the garage bars. You know, in most Hispanic neighborhoods out west, particularly California and Arizona, in the first 2/3 of the 20th century, garages were never wasted on parking cars. Garages were places to start businesses, neighborhood-based businesses, coffee shops, salons. So garages were informal places of commerce, and we provide that kind of thinking. The garage could be a swing space between living or parking a car, or an alley that promotes commerce. Next. So in our last project, I want to just quickly show a revitalization plan premised on missing middle housing. Missing middle housing is that scale of housing between a single family unit and large apartments, particularly garden apartments. It's a scale of housing that we stopped building since World War II because we haven't financed that housing, so developers haven't built that housing. This is the kind of housing, whether it's an ADU or duplex, triplex, bungalow court, mansion apartments, townhomes. This is the kind of housing that our codes don't facilitate the construction of. This was a housing that built our cities, whether they're small cities like that in Arkansas, or great cities like DC or Cleveland, St. Louis, Memphis, Philadelphia. This is the kind of housing that was not only compatible with single family housing, but could hold its own on 6- and 7-story buildings that it was against. This housing is walk-up housing, has a range of units. It accommodated mixed income and allowed people to age in place, and they built great neighborhoods. These are street multiplier buildings that built great streets and great neighborhoods. Next. And so, you know, you can find us on our website with developers who want to build their business models, small scale developers who want to build their business models around housing. This housing is still hard to get financing for. You still need a lot of equity capital to do this. But there are certain triggers in terms of residential code, in terms of financing. For instance, after 4 units, up to 4 units, you can use normative FHA loans to build this housing. After a fourplex above triggers ADA rules. Attached duplexes, for instance, trigger permitting under the International Building Code, which is a lot less lenient than the International Residential Code. Next. And we provided a plan based upon missing middle housing for Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a Delta city in Arkansas in between Little Rock and Memphis. Pine Bluff is the second fastest shrinking city in the U.S. It's fallen from a pinnacle in 1899. The famed sociologist and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois did a study of Black wealth in the U.S. and found that Pine Bluff had the 4th highest level of Black wealth behind Charleston, Richmond, and New York City. At 3 of the 8 council persons in Pine Bluff at the turn of the century in 1900 were African Americans. So this is a rare city in the Delta that actually worked for all, where all could derive a prosperity. It's the exact opposite. Is that all the metrics in Pine Bluff have plummeted at the level, from social welfare to food insecurity, poverty, safety. All those stats are in the basement. So what we've suggested is a revitalization plan premised around housing, which you see in a dark gray, taking 10 blocks, an initial 10 blocks, rebuilding neighborhoods around housing. Those neighborhoods are structured around existing centers of strength in downtown. Next. I'll just direct your attention to the bottom right. You can look at the comparison of housing fabrics from 1918 to 2018. Look at this. 75% of the housing that Pine Bluff had over the last 100 years has been demolished. And it's mostly because it was single family housing. Research is showing that cities with a high level of missing middle housing did not have their housing demolished. Richmond, Baltimore, DC teach us this. On the other hand, Detroit, which has the highest rate of single family housing of any American downtown, 84%, has had most of their housing torn down. So missing middle housing is resilient over time. Next. So we developed 28 building types in missing middle housing for the city, and we said this to them: you need to be number one. The city needs to be a developer. You need to work with nonprofits to get this housing to happen. And they've done that. They've developed an urban renewal agency, which has purchased land to develop these neighborhoods. They're looking for private sector partners now, but basically the market has collapsed in Pine Bluff. So the city needs to be a developer. This is walk-up housing. The walk-up housing, it ranges anywhere from mostly duplex to 12-plex housing. Maybe about 8% of it's single family. We say that single family is not appropriate for downtown Pine Bluff, except for a few lots. Missing middle is how you can really optimize the downtown. This is all range of incomes, but it's mostly for the workforces that work at universities, schools, and city government that want to live downtown. Next. We also say this to them, to the city, that you will give away, you will open source the plans if a property owner elects to build the housing that's been prescribed for their site. So this is a quick way to make all this by right and help the property owner with the kind of soft costs that missing middle housing has when it's 4 units or over. Just going to breeze through these quickly to show you the type of neighborhoods. We have, again, we're at around 15 to 20 units per acre, and we can comfortably do it with the scale of housing that's still at house scale. It's not single family house, but it's compatible with single family housing. And that's important because the market still wants single family housing or something that feels and looks like it. So this is a way of developing housing in tandem with green spaces in neighborhood. We say never develop a housing without a complementary or reciprocal green space. Next, especially in the starter phase. Townhousing, a 3-story townhouse, and it could be single unit, could be duplex, could be triplex. So this is very flexible housing in terms of its tenancy. Next. The hyper porch that connects four-story units with 2-story units, a shared porch. We can put assisted living downtown. There's a great need for that. Next. Stacked duplexes in this kind of special hillocks area that deflects noise from the railroad. So in an otherwise flat town, this gives us a way to develop a kind of unique landscape that is, again, really important for getting the market to buy back into revitalization of this town. Next. Shared streets, developing streets so that they're extension of the porches and the living spaces. Streets that are pedestrian oriented, where we design the streets so that landscapes flow through the street that privileges a pedestrian realm, and we force the motorists to behave socially. signs, speed bumps, all the traffic engineering doesn't work. It's really about designing streets for the space you want to see. So this is a part of designing housing. You're designing the infrastructure that complements the living transect of housing. Next. And that's another shot looking down the living street. The upper right photo pretty much shows you Pine Bluff. There's a lot of vacancy. No one lives downtown anymore. And in fact, in America's most unsafe city, the downtown is the safest place because there's no one there. Next. And wrapping up, showing you swing space, live work, where this wide sidewalk in front of live work could be, if the business market, commercial market comes back, it's adjacent to a museum and a convention center. If that market comes back, we're prepared to provide commerce and retail at the ground floor. If it doesn't, we could comfortably make this residential with urban courts and lawns in front. But I just want to say this, it's important that cities get back in the game, particularly if they have the land of controlling development, of working with nonprofits, which Pine Bluff is doing, to take charge of their city. We can't always rely on the market for issues of equity and affordability. And I firmly believe that cooperative living through bundling of services, architectural types, and land is the only way that we're going to be able to afford future housing. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. I think that's a great transition into some time for panel discussion and maybe a little Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Roshan here to.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I took, I think, like 4 pages of notes during this conversation. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the feedback. I want to start off with one question to Shannon, if you could. You were talking about the key strategies on your repurposing of the buildings and engaging the community, and the community kind of saying, hey, this is what we want to see. As a developer, I've encountered that with cities that say, hey, we want X, Y, and Z here. And as a developer, sometimes you have to have a hard conversation to say, that's not financially feasible. Have any of these deals been killed by that kind of feedback from the community, or maybe help us understand that a little bit?
Sure. So we were worried about that as well. So one of the elements of our kind of 5 components that I didn't highlight is the technical assessments that we had done, because we knew that we were going to get folks interested in ideas that weren't going to be financially viable. And so we tried to address some of that. We hired a historic preservation consultant and an architect that had a strong history of building reuse, and specifically school reuse, to conduct an assessment of each of the sites, paired up with a market researcher. He did a market analysis essentially on all of our sites so that we could scale everything in financial viability. And we had those conversations up front and early before we even got proposals that came in. And
Okay.
So our effort was to try to save the proposal teams from some of that discussion.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Roshan, you're on mute.
I have to say, I'm sorry, I was on mute. That your presentations were refreshing in general, that because one theme I heard running through all of them was about focusing on how people live and how they socially navigate spaces. And very often when we're talking about affordability, we're very focused on operating costs and the rents that residents or the mortgages that residents would pay. Interesting, Shannon, that there are 15 school districts, and kind of tying to Stephen's presentation, I am right in the midst of acquiring 5.5 vacant acres in the middle of the city that was a former school building. to do a bungalow court project, the missing middle. And so Shannon, in politically, I'm just interested in, has the school board or school system that you've been involved with always been so open to these type of projects, or how did you all navigate with those elected officials?
So our school district is separate from Lake City Council, but we do have an elected board. And you're right, there was some navigation early when I first got hired. The board said we're not going to sell any buildings because we're going to need them all. And I said, I'm going to convince you that you're not going to need all of these now, and that you can't have viable reuses is only under a lease scenario, because that's what they wanted to do. And actually, the local ULI chapter and others were very helpful in providing kind of that development context and challenges if they were going to pursue that effort. And so, I think we had a very community-driven board that wanted to see productive reuse and had seen some of the challenges that had happened pre-2010. And luckily we pitched them on a process to use that they bought into, and it's held true over several administrations and several board elections. So having that really defined process that you stick to is really important for a public entity.
And Scott, I don't want to take over, but I know we don't have much time. I wanted to address Tamara and Kiana. Of course, I was giddy when I heard that there was a policy, people, place, planet, and performance. And
I wrote that down too.
Interestingly enough, the fact that you did an adaptive reuse project on a former house of worship, a Jewish house of worship, one of the concepts I talk about often when I'm on panels and I'm talking about equity and affordability. I looked at some religious traditions and what they thought about community and what was necessary for us to have successful communities. And in Judaism, in the Torah, it kind of revolves around a place where the rabbi should exist, needs to have all of these things. And so I was just impressed. I don't really have a question with the fact that you're looking at urban food, farming, not just housing. You're not one thing. And so it's 10 things that need to exist for that Jewish community to be acceptable for the teacher to be present. And so I think you all are addressing that in your work.
Well, I know that wasn't a question, but based on that, I just want to share one of the more interesting things that has emerged for us in this process is, as Kiana talked about, the rotunda, the actual worship space, is going to be converted into some sort of public serving gathering space that's complementary to the farm. But we have been in touch with a number of faith-based, some ecumenical, some actually from the Jewish tradition, who are very focused on social justice issues as wanting to co-locate in that space. So yeah, the points of regeneration and those P4 principles, they're stated at a policy level in, it's all about metrics and showing what we're doing, but they are resonating at the community level in the way that partners are coming together to restore some of our neighborhoods in the city.
I had two questions. One, if I could jump to Stephen's presentation that I thought was really interesting. I love what you guys are doing by creating these kind of open source plans, which I think is where if somebody's looking at a piece of land and maybe they don't have that skill set or the ability to put some of those dollars up front for architectural plans. I love that idea that they're open source, and I think we could use something like that here in Memphis, because as you drive around some of these neighborhoods, there are so many empty lots that, you know, somebody would have to invest in architectural drawings. They'd have to, you know, wonder if it would, you know, make it through the approval process. Is there also a thought to putting some construction numbers to that, you know, rough order magnitude to help speed that along, so you can do a quick back of the napkin assessment of that site and say, yeah, I can make this work?
I mean, have we done the construction numbers?
Yeah, or in connection with the city, because you said the city's taken the lead on being a developer in this instance.
They have, and what the city has done is amass the land downtown to you know, have control of development of these neighborhoods. It's one of the problems of shrinking cities, particularly in places like Pine Bluff over the last 40 years, is that the administration has just been gutted. And so any kind of development experience has been lost. They're not even really used to pulling permits. And so, you know, our source of funding to work there, and most of our expertise has been with philanthropic organizations, particularly Go Forward Pine Bluff, which is a part of the foundation of a local bank there. And so we're still trying to get past the skirmishes that you typically happen in the city council to get them to move the ball forward on revamping not just codes, because they're still using single-use zoning for downtown, which is preventing most development, but then moving it forward to form-based codes, and then this kind of by right development that we're talking about. So we really haven't gotten as far yet as the plan is suggesting they need to be at. In other words, it's design alone doesn't do it. There's going to be a multi-year political process.
Right. Anna, did we want to, or Roshan, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or do we have any questions that we want to address from the participants?
I didn't have anything to add. I see that there are some questions being answered in the chat box. I don't know if any of the presenters want to, in case people are not looking at the chat, address the triple bottom line and some of the other questions that have been asked.
Yeah, so does somebody want to take a shot at, there was a question about the triple bottom line, and let's take a shot at defining that, the triple bottom line. Tamara, is that something you want to address?
Yeah, sure. And I think, you know, triple bottom line does hit on those three pillars that I alluded to. You know, I described it as affordability, sustainability, and financial viability, but alternatively, it is often a focus on equitable outcomes. So there is a concern for how are people being served, how is the environment being served, and then how is what is the financial performance? Is it still profitable, right? So it is, you know, not just looking at a bottom line of did this project succeed or fail on the basis of whether or not it made money, but how did it accomplish or you know, positively contribute to these other things. And so I think someone in the comment had said, you know, it is I think an outgrowth of sustainable development. You see, at least we're starting to see some B corporations in the development space, mostly among design and architectural firms. But, you know, much like the Patagonias and the like-minded retailers, it is looking at the lens of development with those other goals in mind.
Great, thank you. And I know that having these conversations, especially listening to, you know, how you guys talked about, you know, that three-legged stool. You know, I know that's something that I think we all need to be cognizant of as we move forward. I mean, specifically on the environmental side, I'm curious, have you guys been able to take advantage, or has it been approved in the Pittsburgh market yet? Have you been able to take advantage of any CPACE money?
We personally have not. In this development has a capital stack with enough complexity.
Yeah.
That we're not layering it in there. But I do know of at least 2 other deals that are pursuing the CPACE funding, and one of them is also one of our consultants is acting as a consultant to that development team, and it is also a mixed income project, mixed income and mixed use, of course, because of the CPACE.
Yeah, and for those who may not know, CPACE is a program that's slowly kind of rolling out across the country. But basically what it does is there's a group of investors that would be willing to invest in sustainable practices like solar and those sorts of things. So you segregate those costs and soft costs, hard costs and soft costs, and then they will invest. They get their return is guaranteed through property taxes. So it becomes a property assessment so that it runs with the property. So let's say it's $2 million and you sell the property, 3 years later, that $2 million is still getting paid off, but you're getting the value of that at the sale. So it's an inducement to, make the project more environmentally sustainable, which I think is a great program, great idea. And it helps the investors. It helps ultimately the project because it runs with it. So I'd like to see more of that, especially, in Tennessee and some of these other places where we can bring that new sustainable technology to any development, because there's, that becomes a source of equity in the deal.
Yeah, and just to plug ULI Pittsburgh for a second, we are doing a 3-part sustainability series in conjunction with an office here at the city that is focused on one Pittsburgh for all, and has, it's the embodiment of these P4 principles that we described earlier. And one of the developers who's using CPACE has been a presenter in that. So we have one more left in that series.
I was looking at the chat. I didn't want to ignore Jay Smith's question about social programs. I think the panelists hinted at some partnerships with other agencies to provide social programs. And if anyone wants to speak to your partnerships with other agencies to provide social programs to your residents.
I can, or Kiana, if you want to jump in as well. So our property management partner out of Beacon, which is called Beacon Residential Management, depending on the core population at a property, tailors services, and all of our properties have at least a part-time service coordinator, and they may be focusing on financial literacy, they may be running after school programs, they may be coordinating with a healthcare clinic, or in the case of a building that has a lot of visually impaired residents, bringing services in from a local provider who can assist with large format, large print reading materials, and making sure that coordination is in place. So it's really, it's always present, but it's kind of idiosyncratic in that it's governed by the needs of the particular community.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and try and connect that question back to the triple bottom line. I think it's important to remember triple bottom line emerged out of is a market phenomenon. It's the market trying to, realign its purpose with multiple bottom lines. When we talk about community development, we're not just talking about triple bottom line, but we're talking about good policy environments that enable the market. And for us, that's the really important connection. We find in many of our communities, there is no policy environment. There is no convening of public sector policy to actually create the framework in which markets thrive. So really, good community design needs the partnership between market, policy, and good design parameters in order for all of these things to work. So, you know, I would just caution that not every social service or social benefit is going to come from market delivery. It's going to come from public sector. And we can't forget that it has a fundamental role to play in partnership. So we always need to be triangulating between those three.
Thanks, everybody. Steve, that was a great sort of closing statement there. I think as all of us are thinking about how to do this, especially in the context of trying to build a city that is affordable to everyone at all sorts of different levels. I know we're going to start losing people here right now. I want to call your attention to two things. As I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks from today at the same time, we have our third session of this series. And the three speakers who will be presenting at that session are Michael Braverman, who is from Baltimore and the sort of architect behind the Vacant to Value program that they have been running there for years. John Shepard, who works for Elmington Capital Group that has been doing affordable housing throughout the Southeast, including some projects here in Memphis. And a gentleman named Reginald Scott. Reginald works for the Detroit Land Bank Authority, and they've created some really neat incentive programs for people to purchase properties and redevelop them there. So we'll be hearing from those three experts about the interesting things trends and things that they are accomplishing in their cities. And then the other thing that I want to call your attention to is here in Memphis next Thursday, the 29th, the Housing and Community Development is hosting their housing summit. I've just put a link in the chat. There are a lot of incredible speakers that are lined up for that. If anyone is interested in sort of hearing more about the sort of details and context for which people are approaching housing here in Memphis, and also hear from some other national trends, that's a great place to go do that as well. So I encourage you to sign up. So with those two plugs, I just want to extend an enormous thank you to Shannon and Steve and Tamara and Kiana for their presentations today. I think we could have had an hour-and-a-half session or longer on any one of the topics and projects that y'all were presenting. So I appreciate your abilities to try and capture some of those top-line things and produce share your projects with us to add to the thinking that we have here in Memphis as we're approaching our markets and looking at innovative ways to approach real estate here in our community. And then another final thank you to Roshan and Scott, who have really stepped up to the plate and are moderating all four of these sessions for us and helping keep the content chain and connections amongst all of these conversations for all of us. So with that, I will say thank you to everyone and send you off, and I hope you all have the rest of your Thursday is wonderful and you have a good weekend. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.